now, please, I will open the floor for your questions. And also, if we can put the screen, we will start looking at the ones that have been sent. So is there anyone in the audience that will... Yeah, you can raise your hand or... Nobody on the floor? No questions? No comments?
Thank you. Okay. No, sit down. Thank you. There is, in my experience, a gap, a strong gap between policy processes and academic feeling or product. For example, between the connection, cooperative connection, under the umbrella of integrated territorial investment more than local development plans and innovation, there is a restrictive vision of the policymaker, because they don't see immediately the result of this innovative instrument. So, in your experience, because in my experience it's very difficult, to the dialogue between citizenship and policymaker at a different level, it's not easy, and we use different languages and different communication systems. In your experience, what is the limit of the application? Because probably if European Commission, European DG Regio produce a common legislative system, also voluntary in initial part, this could cover this gap, but it's not easy to push.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Jellica, I think it's for you the question.
I'm not sure I fully understood. So you see a big challenge in elaboration of these integrated strategies between the different policymakers, sectorial policymakers, universities, and yeah.
Research is clear what is an integrated territorial investment and how we can make it or use it. But if I ask my regional stakeholder or regional policymaker, he say no, because it's so much complex, it's a different type, decide in operative regional operative program, the amount in each field. So there is a gap between the research, practical application of the instrument and the policymaker feeling or behavior. So what is a possible solution? Because in my experience, Hungary applied integrated territorial investment from 2014. In Italy, probably in another life.
Well, I wouldn't be so pessimistic, because you will be able to access all the experiences with ITIs in this programming period, so that they may serve as lessons learned. But I see you see this this disconnect between this tool, which is flexible and allows for this integration, which is not very well understood at a local level, which may not be ready to implement this tool. This is why it's made optional. I mean, yeah, only the more, I would say, the areas or cities, larger cities, which kind of can take on board such a tool should be advised to go for it. In our assessment, the tool has been proven to be especially appropriate for functional areas and metropolitan areas, which are already somewhat more mature and experienced in this multi-governance setup, and they are experienced in reaching out for different funds. This complexity still remains with ITI, although it is simplified in a sense. There is no this requirement to institutionalize all the arrangements fully. It will be as anybody sees fit. But then again, there is also a CLD, which for the smaller situations, such as urban neighborhoods or smaller territories, could be more appropriate tools. And also, yeah, I didn't maybe mention this, you know, we are getting bigger and bigger on capacity building, and different types of supports will be offered for all of these tools that both CLD and ITI, or I would say, I don't know for sure, but if it's a national tool probably as well, they could benefit from our capacity building measure.
Thank you, Jelica. Maybe Carlo can come also from your experience. Can you give some?
Thank you. I like this debate. I agree on both views, actually. My point is that I see that it's not only a matter of making it voluntary, and therefore when there is a complex territory that has the institutional capacity and the need for such a complex tool, then they will take it on board. It's also to take care of who's actually having the responsibility domestically to implement it. Because I see in many cases there are some departments, for example in our regions, that are very sensitive to territorial aspects. Yeah, they deal with environmental protection and development and so on. They deal with territorial development, but then they are not the one that manage the European Union money. And those that manage the European Union money, they are not as sensitive as the others at the other department in, let's say, taking on board these tools. And therefore, as they have the handle of the bag with the money in their hand, then they will do the simple way. They will do the simplest way. In order to spend the money on specific focus priority, we are mostly focusing on economic development and growth, and we will do their way without taking territorial issues and place special logics into account. So maybe there was a way, and this is the economy between strategic planning, software, and so on, and programming. There's hard programming with no special dimension. Maybe there is a way to attach some conditionality to the fact that more than it, because I know that it already exists, but still in a further and more carrot and stick way, maybe, so that you should actually build horizontal interdepartmental cooperation at the regional level between various departments that do things in order to then be able to assess the money. I don't know what is the solution, but I perceive the problem. That's what I say.
Sure.
You know, there are challenges in this partnership relations, and it's hard to form it in such a way that the higher level authority actually does not act as a controller, but more as some entity that empowers the other players. So this is a big challenge, and I always think of what we have under our urban agenda for the EU, where we truly managed to establish the partnerships where member states, cities, and EU institutions work at all equals. We will need to assess you know, how successful this kind of partnership has been produced, but so far the working method is very unique, and maybe, you know, the member states could apply it as well.
Before getting to the Slido, I will, following with the discussion that you had now, would you think Luca and Carlo, and of course Ilona and Jelica, think that the main constraints towards the implementation of such tools and governance, for example, between strategic planning and statutory planning, to put an example, is these sensitivities at the territory, the reason that there is no clear who will be the one leading with conflicts between vertical and horizontal hierarchies, or finance issues, and which one will be the biggest constraint, or the incentive to do that is basically the financial issue? How would you put it from your experience? Sure.
Okay, yeah. I think this is again very country specific, because, for example, in Czech Republic, the statutory planning, the zoning and land use planning, it's very rigid, and it doesn't offer so many, let's say, opportunities to cooperate beside some special cases like consulting when actually the plan is almost done. So that's like one case. I think this whole system just wasn't designed to work in the environment of new functional relations and much larger metropolitan areas than it used to be some, let's say, decades ago. And actually, I think, for example, our institute, we are responsible for both statutory planning and strategic planning. And at the level of the city, I think we are quite aligned, and these plans work very well together. But the problem actually is that we cannot cover the area behind the administrative borders. So I think in probably most of countries, this to align better the statutory and strategic planning, it would need some administrative reform, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other way, I think that the main challenge is embodied into the intrinsic diversity that the territorial governance and special planning system have all over Europe. Because this dichotomy or tension between strategic planning and statutory planning, take away the EU money, take away the EU programming, make the EU dance, it is not solved domestically. In many places. Well, in some places it is better than in others. If you take back to the EU compendium of 1997, it says clearly that some systems are more mature than others. Then we can say mature is not a good word, and we can talk about differences and so on. But there are actual differences. And in some countries, strategic planning is more, let's say, spread than in some others. And if we start saying that in order to territorialize the impact of EU programming, then you need to think strategically, then you may expect that some countries are more, let's say, accustomed than others to do that. I think so the problem is there, and I think that the solution, or at least a step towards the solution, is to build knowledge on how special planning and territorial governance work in countries in Europe. And we tried with Compass, although we just scratched the tip of the iceberg. Yeah? Just there is to see a little tip of the iceberg, and then there is a big iceberg underneath. So I think additional research is needed, and I think this should directly fuel into the logic and reasoning of the European Commission on that. Not only for taking into account this, but also for, let's say, sustain its own position on special planning and territorial governance issue. I think that's also very important.
Thank you. Let me take one of the Slido questions. In fact, we will join the two first, because both are concerned about the issue of cross-border programs and how this will be either encouraged or further encouraged or absorbed within macro-regional strategies. Jelka, maybe you want to take this one?
Well, all I know that territorial cooperation will be further mainstreamed in this programming period, and cross-border programs and Interreg will not be this standalone part of the cohesion policy, but the member states would be encouraged to contribute to cross-border and Interreg programs also from their mainstream programs. So let's see how this will play out.
Thank you. Any further questions from the ground? Yeah, there is one over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick and I hope mostly positive comment related to the Prague example that was mentioned about asymmetries between core cities and surrounding municipalities as a challenge, particularly for ITI. From recent research in Eastern Poland, I looked at a case of an ITI where these asymmetries existed, and in fact for the first meeting of the ITI, the core city representatives didn't turn up for the meeting because they couldn't see incentives in it for them, but with some gentle persuasion from the programme authorities and the financial incentive that was involved in it, they did take part, and now there's a strong cooperation across these administrative boundaries, mostly in the field of local transport. The caveats to that are, first, it seems as if these things take time. It's cultural change that's taking place. And we know that from cohesion policy, time is always marching on, and there's always targets and indicators and so on to be met. So that to me is a challenge. And the second challenge is demonstrating this softer value, this it's like this cooperative culture. How can we capture this value in concrete terms? This sort of softer added value. These are the sort of challenges I think that we have.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else? Then, sure.
I mentioned the diversity of approaches in this programming period. So, for instance, Prague had, like, for the core city, the OP Prague, whereas ITI addressed the metropolitan area or surrounding Prague. So at one point we thought it was a bit unfortunate that there are like two different tools and mechanisms and two different strategies. However, they managed to work because the OP Prague contributes to the ITI Prague. We have other examples, one being from Croatia, where they used ITI alone to institutionalize metropolitan governance. So the core city, through an ITI, reached out to all the surrounding local governance and brought them on board in one single strategy. I mean, there are challenges. The process is slow, but ultimately it's leading, it's going in a good direction.
Ilona, you want to?
Yes, coming back to this question and some observations on the triggers that can stimulate to use those collaborative tools. I can see that there are at least 4 of them, 2 more top-down and 2 more bottom-up. And from bottom-up perspective, it's either a strong political leader or a personality who can trigger the process and start the debate and, you know, join people around the common shared understanding of the need to address certain issues. Or alternatively, there can be a very strong demand and push from the local inhabitants to address a certain issue that is of a particular concern. For example, I don't know, the availability of public transport that goes beyond the city core and addresses the daily needs of the citizens, because it does boil down to the quality of life of certain citizens. And then from a more top-down perspective, one, of course, is related to the availability of funds, as we already discussed, and we have seen that cohesion policy has managed to trigger a lot of incentives in this sense to promote more collaborative planning and action, also at regional, local level. And then the other one I mentioned was the financing, and the other one is the legislation. Also, we have seen from the studies that we have implemented that in certain countries there was also a top-down solution by a national government creating and offering a legislation and more or less imposing those functional governance solutions to regions and cities, well, which ones of those triggers are most efficient? I wouldn't say. I think there should be a combination of both, and this combination should be carefully selected considering the local specificity of different places and what actually people can, you know, accept as the most useful approach and acceptable way for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilona. Before we close, let me just summarize the interventions. Ilona has presented a variety and a whole range of tools to support polycentric development. Carlo has explained the results of these two studies, COMPASS and SPIMA, showing all these attempts or experiments that are all around Europe trying to figure out in different conditions how to deal with polycentric development. We have had the chance to hear about Prague, and it's clear that European funds will play a key role helping and supporting the polycentric development. But as Professor Prada was saying this morning, the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean that there is no reason why to do the battle. So we will keep doing this battle. Thank you very much.